Hey, hello. My name is Jake Noble. I'm a freshman student here at San Francisco State University. Today, I'm going to be presenting about the memoir from Chanel Miller, published in 2019, titled Know My Name. Starting off, two main characters in the memoir of the novel are Brock Turner and Chanel Miller. Brock Turner is the defendant in the lawsuit in the case that we'll later learn about today in the book describes, and Chanel Miller is the plaintiff or the individual pressing charges against Brock Turner, who was the assailant. Brock was born 8/1/1995 in Dayton, Ohio, and he graduated from a high school called Oakwood High School there in Dayton, Ohio. He was on a full ride athletic swimming scholarship to Stanford University at the time. He is 19 when he was arrested first. Brock Turner did have a history of drug use and of alcoholic, problems and drinking problems and such. That was traced back to him back when he was in high school to now. And Chanel Miller and the Santa Clara County District Attorney Office investigated that and used that as part of the case against Brock to discredit his character. Chanel Miller, born June 12, 1992, at the time is 22 years old, who has graduated from UC Santa Barbara. She is referred to as Emily Doe or Jane Doe, an alumna of another college, and she's from the city of Palo Alto, went to Henry Gunn High School in the city of Palo Alto, the rival to more famously known Palo Alto High School, where she has a younger sister named Tiffany, which we'll learn about a little bit later. So entering chapter 1 and chapter 2, chapter 1 starts off with Miller kind of giving us a whole story of what happened, breaking down the remaining 13 chapters into kind of extending it past the date of the assault. Chanel Miller, she's a 22-year-old graduate from UCSB. She details the events that occurred there, January 17th, 2015. She details the events that led up to the sexual assault, which included drinking with her sister, Tiffany, and her sister Tiffany's friend, Julia, and some other friends at a frat party there just off the campus of Stanford. Miller's mother drops off the ladies at Stanford, where they continue to party. Of course, at the frat party, it's noted that Chanel drinks extensively to the point where she does pretty much black out, which kind of leads on to her loss of consciousness and such, which kind of blinds some of the events that really happened that night from her point of view. Miller, in chapter 2, wakes up in the hospital. She's surrounded by a police officer, and she gets a call immediately from the Stanford dean, and they inform her that she was a victim of sexual assault, and that the hospital there immediately performed the rape kit extensively without even, asking Chanel if it was okay. They just immediately do it while Chanel's still in a state of shock. Palo Alto Police Detective Kim asks her some questions regarding that night. Chanel later calls her sister Tiffany to come pick her up from the hospital. And she stresses to Detective Kim that the man who they believe was the assaulter of Chanel had been harassing Tiffany all night, and that Tiffany would have some information on him. Chapter 3 and 4, the sisters return home. So they decide not to tell their parents what happened, so they don't worry their parents. They don't tell them right away. Miller heads over to the police department to retrieve her phone and does speak with Detective Kim a little more. That's where she agrees to press charges against Brock Turner. In chapter 4, Chanel attempts to kind of move on with her life. Tiffany is called into the police station to identify the blonde man for the night, which was Brock. She doesn't know that, of course, at the time. Chanel later reads about the man, Brock Turner, in a newspaper. Finally, Chanel receives a call from Assistant District Attorney from the Santa Clara County DA's office, Aliyah Kanasari, who informs Chanel that her identity will be protected as Emily Doe, but indicates that her sister, who was not under assault, yet was still over the age of 18, will be referred to as Tiffany Miller. Chanel reads a bunch of negative remarks in comment sections from multiple news articles that published the story. The bottom picture here shows ADA Aliyah Kanasari, referred to as Aliyah or Leah in the book at all times, as she speaks on CNN to kind of cover the story. I don't know when this was taken. It's just a screen grab that I was able to find, but I think we need to give credit to the DA here, to the ADA here, more than the book does and more than we do as a community Aaliyah no longer works for the Santa Clara County DA's office, though. Chapter 5 and 6, Chanel continues to struggle with her emotions and work. She meets with Aaliyah, the DA at ADA, for the first time in person, and is advised to act appropriately and kind of stay low key, or in other words, be on her best behavior. Lucas comes to visit from Philadelphia, where he attends graduate school, and she tells him about the assault. Turner is eventually charged with 3 counts of felony assault. Other charges are added later on. We'll learn about those a little bit later. And a hearing date is set, but multiple times the defense is able to delay that hearing. Chanel applies and then is accepted into a printmaking class over in Rhode Island. Chapter 6 moves on. She flies from New California to this small town, Rhode Island, where she participates in this art printing class. She receives extreme harassment from community members, you could say, from other men, that as she walks to and from her school and to her current apartment. During that summer, she is able to socialize and begin to feel more empowered as she meets with some men. She's not men, but some ladies that she shares with, that she bunks with, and also some ladies from that printing class. This picture below here is a grab that I grabbed in the 2016, but 2020, excuse me, the 2020 when they first rolled out Chanel's art display here in San Francisco. Chapter 7 and 8, Chanel arrives in Philadelphia to stay with Lucas until a set date for the hearing is given to her. One day, she suddenly gets super angry at Lucas, slams her phone down due to just her inability to kind of compensate with the time and handle the stress. Lucas was very kind of punctual with when her meetings were, how she needs to do things, how she needs to behave, and that kind of overwhelmed her. She later reads a police report late at night that describes more of what happened during the event, where she learns more about her 2 rescuers, the 2 Swedish students, who chased down and grabbed and held down Brock. But first, they checked on her first. That's something the book notes that she notes as well, that was super important to her. Chapter 8, Chanel returns to California for the first time since moving to Philadelphia to testify. Chanel understands that going into depth about the event is going to be difficult to do. She becomes at peace with that idea. Things do take a turn when Chanel reads several negative comments about her actions, about her, her intoxication, and her, this quote being like her fault for being the victim and not protecting herself, keeping herself safe, drinking too much, etc. That kind of, for lack of a better term, throws her into a little depression. Chapter 9 and 10, Chanel reads an online article about Turner's online testimony, where he claimed that Chanel had given consent. That was the biggest thing from the defense's side, of that consent was given. So it's almost like the defense was trying to pivot it to be a he said, she said of was consent given, but then can you be drunk and give consent? And I think that's a huge problem in today's, this is 2016, but let's fast forward now to 2021. That's still a problem, and that's still something that college campuses have to deal with every day. And Brock claimed that he didn't try to run away, but when he was confronted by the Swedes, Chanel was present for closing statements, which the book reads to us is that's rare for victims to stay and listen to that, as they can be kind of gory and graphic and super personable. The definition of the capability of consent, like I mentioned, was a centered argue piece from both sides. Chapter 10, after a few day deliberation, the jury declared Turner guilty on 2 of the original 5 charges, as some of the charges were dropped to seem more convincing for the jury to convict. Chanel then returns to Philadelphia for a few months to then remain with Lucas until he completes his graduate school. Chanel speaks with a probation officer over the phone who recommended that Turner shouldn't receive any prison time. First-time offense that's notable, first-time criminal offense. And of course, the young athlete student, potential Team USA swimmer, was obviously something that may have convinced the probation officer to recommend, no sentencing that's too extreme. Chanel obviously pushes against this. In return, she writes her victim impact statement that's 28 pages, and that's pretty key. Turner was sentenced to 6 months in the Santa Clara County Jail, where he was able to parole out after 3 months. This impact statement was published by BuzzFeed in Chapter 11. Her statement, within a few weeks, it notes, has been read by nearly 15 million people. Here is the start of her victim impact statement. Here on the red, that's kind of how she starts the first paragraph. Chanel received tons of support and emails and physical things in the mail. Well, a lot of letters and gifts would be mailed to the Santa Clara DA's office, and then Aaliyah would then mail them over to Chanel. Chapter 12, Chanel and Lucas decided to move into San Francisco together, where Chanel then transitions from her impact statement in Friends Media to kind of focusing on this memoir that we just read, of course. She decides to foster a couple of senior rescue dogs and adopt them for herself, keep the apartment, keep her some company, while Lucas has a startup job that he is constantly having to go back and forth to. She now learns that Turner filed for an appeal and that was later denied, which is good. So she was given an apology by Stanford along with $150,000 to cover the cost of some therapy, which she did keep, but I believe she used that for other costs, not necessarily a therapist. She also learned that in chapter 13 that she cannot sue Stanford. There's no legal recourse against Stanford. She was advised by multiple attorneys that that's not something that's possible within the confines of law. She accepts the money, and as I mentioned, she then uses that for some family's expenses. Stanford then begins the construction of a garden at the location of her assault. Stanford and Chanel go back and forth on the contents of what the plaque should read. Chanel reflects on writing her memoir. She is inspired by the story of Dr. Christine Ford's testimony in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee of a survivor of sexual assault against Brett Kavanaugh. The heels of this and the Me Too movement are what definitely motivated Chanel to write her memoir. She doesn't really mention this in the book too much, but we know this from reading some Oprah Winfrey videos and interviews I was able to look at before we started reading the novel. The final pages in her memoir recall back to the people that she emailed, or are written to the people that emailed her, and sent her letters as she was then kind of thanking them and trying to give them some inspirement as they also inspired her. Chanel ends on a moment of support, including to those who are not ready to share their story yet. Here are a few of the resources that I used to look at some additional news, and most of the images as well came from these links. So thank you. Again, my name is Jake Noble. I am from SFSU University. But I definitely enjoyed the book, definitely enjoyed the novel. I know when we were choosing the novel, Born a Crime, this one, or the other novel, which I'm forgetting the name, it was kind of, I wanted something that was local. I wanted something that was much more impactful and graphic that would keep my attention, keep the attention of the reader. I definitely think that Chanel does a wonderful job making that known, keeping that in. She mentioned in her novel multiple times that it is graphic what I'm reading. It is graphic what you as a reader are going to read, but I experienced that in real life. I was there in real life, and I'm now writing this again, and I'm sure that I'm going to have to read this 100 times over. And that trauma is going to still stick in my mind. That's what she says. And that makes me go on to think that there are so many others that are going to have to endure that same type of thing, that same type of trauma. And they can, when they're ready to share their story, we hope that they do finally have a platform to do that. So thank you.